When we hear the word psychopath, we think of serial killers or CEOs. Joe Goldberg from You, probably one of you watching this is a psychopath. But I've never heard of animals being psychopaths. I mean, I've heard of animals attacking people and being aggressive in general. I don't think that's psychopathy. But first, we have to define what psychopathy is. Now, psychopathy is not being evil. In humans, it's a neurobiological condition. Brain imaging consistently shows that there are differences between psychopaths and normal humans, especially in the amygdala, which processes fear and emotion, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control and judgment, also some serotonin systems, which are linked to aggression and inhibition. Now, this leads to low fear, low empathy, shallow or no emotions, and poor impulse control, which is a perfect recipe for a psychopath. But here's the key difference. Human psychopathy is about morality. Psychopaths understand right from wrong. They just don't care. Now, if we map this onto animals, animals don't really have any moral frameworks. So scientists can't really define animals as psychopaths because they lack that base foundation of morality. Instead, scientists call it psychopathy-like traits, right? That's what they study. And these are essentially the functional equivalents of psychopathy-like traits in humans. Modern psychology breaks psychopathy into three key traits. Boldness, which is how fearless or immune to stress a person is. Meanness, which is how callous they are or the lack of bonding. And disinhibition, which is impulsivity and self-control. Now, this model works great in humans, right? And surprisingly, it also maps onto some animals. Let's start with a no-brainer, chimpanzees. I don't think anyone would be surprised to find out that chimpanzees can be psychopaths. I mean, they're related to us. We have like 98% of the same DNA. In the 1970s, in Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania, there was a female chimp called Passion. And Passion had a daughter called Palm. Oh, that's very cute, right? Passion and Palm, two chimps. But the story isn't so cute. Now, Passion and Palm would regularly steal babies from their mothers and kill them for no reason, and then eat them, sometimes in front of their mothers. Now, this wasn't a period of famine that they had to resort to cannibalism. This wasn't about survival. They were living within their own community. It was just insiders attacking their own society. And it was a repeated and patterned behavior. 20 years later, in the same park, there was a dominant male chimpanzee who goes by the name of Pruitt. Now, most alpha chimps ruled through alliance. They understood the dynamics of society, but Pruitt wasn't exactly like that. Pruitt ruled through pure terror. He would attack chimps for no reason, he would severely injure babies, and use rocks as weapons, and there was no reconciliation. He never felt bad for any of this. The chimpanzees followed Pruitt for a while, but just out of fear, until they coordinated and ambushed him and collectively killed Pruitt. You've probably heard of Jane Goodall at some point in your life, the famous chimpanzee expert who dedicated her life to studying chimps. Now, she initially hypothesized that chimps were essentially innately nice and empathetic, more so than humans. But seeing such instances and this other instance of a chimpanzee war, which I'll probably talk about in another video, she realized that we're probably not so different, which I would have probably told you when I figured out we had 98% of the same DNA. Scientists later formalized this using a CHMP tri-scale, which is just a chimp triarchic model, like we had for humans. Caretakers were responsible for ranking chimps based on boldness, meanness, and disinhibition, and the scores would predict real behavior. And it was a way of categorizing chimps based on their personality. It was one of the first chimp personality tests. Moving on to man's best friend, dogs. In the 1960s, psychologists tested avoidance. They would place a plate of food in front of the dogs and shock the dog if the dog went close to the food. And after a while, most of the dogs learned that you're not supposed to touch the food and they would avoid it. However, there were some dogs, especially some breeds, like the Basenjis, who just kept grabbing the food. They didn't care that they were getting shocked. Similar to them were the bull terriers. They were fearless. They had no fear when they were getting shocked, and they had an insanely high prey drive. Is this psychopathy or just prey drive? Now, dogs are usually emotional, social, and empathetic creatures. Veterinary behaviorists have documented rare dogs with something called idiopathic aggression. Dogs that attack familiar humans without any warning, show no fear signals, and just immediately return to calm after a sudden outrage. That behavior was coined as idiopathic aggression. One cluster of cases involved English Springer Spaniels in the UK. Owners reported sudden violent attacks, often during calm moments, targeting faces and necks. They studied these dogs and the neurological exam suggested that there was an abnormal serotonin regulation and possible seizure-like activity. This became known as the sudden rage syndrome. Apparently, this pattern is real, and you've probably heard of it. You've probably seen this on the news from time to time, where a dog suddenly just loses it and attacks people and then just is back to calm in a second. When I first read this, I immediately thought, okay, this is some wolf-like shit that hasn't been evolved out of this dog. But apparently, wolves almost never do this. You don't see this kind of behavior in wolves. And there's a reason for that. In the wild, poor impulse control gets you killed. Social instability gets you killed or expelled. So these behavioral traits are filtered out by the wolves themselves, right? They don't stand for that. But when you introduce domestication, these natural filters are gone. These traits or these genes that are dormant and that can be passed down from dog to dog has no chance of being wiped out. So humans accidentally preserve these behavioral outliers. That doesn't mean the dog is evil. It just means those specific dogs wouldn't make good pets. In the case of dogs, this seems more like mental disorders, which, I mean, to think of it, psychopathy, is it a mental disorder? I don't know. I think it's safe to say we don't have enough evidence to say that dogs can have psychopathic-like traits. More like there are some behavioral outliers that cause this insane aggression that's linked to prey drive or something. Since we talked about dogs, it's only fair we talk about cats. Now, cats aren't pack animals. They don't seek approval, they don't apologize, and that sort of makes them feel a bit unsettling. And if I asked you to guess at the start of the video, which animal do you think displays the psychopathic-like traits, you would have probably said cats, because of how they act. But I don't think that's the case. See, cats do engage in some behaviors that make it seem like they're psychopathic. One of them is surplus killing. Studies across the UK, US, and Australia show cats hunt even when fully fed, which is rare for animals. There was one documented cat that killed over 100 animals in a year. It's not about hunger though. It's neurological reward. Hunting, the act of hunting, is apparently an insane dopamine hit for a cat. This is why you often see cats capture prey and then release it only to chase it again and catch it, and then just repeat the cycle. And it seems like they're just toying with their food or they're just toying with their prey, which seems psychopathic, but they're just hooked onto dopamine, right? They're addicts for this shit. The chase activates reward circuits in the cat's brain, and it's not about efficiency anymore as it is with a lot of other predators. I mean, if you were to compare humans and cats in this regard, in humans, killing for stimulation overlaps with psychopathic traits. You would clearly say that someone's a psychopath if they did that. But in cats, it's hardwired predatory circuitry. It's not really fair to call them psychopaths for this. Now, if you're interested, in 2021, there was this cat try study. As we did with chimps, they tried to make a triarchic model for cats. Owners were asked to rank cats based on their boldness, meanness, and disinhibition. Cats that ranked in the top 20th percentile were usually cats that would engage in surplus killing, who would knock shit over the counter, didn't listen to their owners. Cats at the bottom of the scale were generally cats that were more attached to their owners and a bit more clingy. Now, not a lot of people agree with this model, and a lot of people have issues with it, so don't take it as evidence of anything. But if you want to try it out yourself, there's probably a questionnaire that you can find online. Alright, so I saved the best for last, which in this case is probably the worst and most disgusting one. We're talking about sea otters. I only know about sea otters because I found out they hold hands while they're floating so they don't drift apart, and everyone just assumed that sea otters are the cutest fucking thing on the planet. But I think I can change your mind. In the late 2000s, there was an otter called Felix. Felix was a lone male, and what he would do was capture harbor seal pups, drown them, and rape them, and he would bite their faces off during this mating. And after the seal pups died, which they would, he would continue necrophilia on their bodies for 105 minutes, as stated by this article I read. Firstly, I want to address a few things. If you were the person who was responsible for documenting this case of Felix the otter, at what point during the necrophilia would you think, okay, I've had enough, I can just add a plus after this? And why was it 105 minutes? You could have watched for 15 minutes and then just added the plus and said, okay, I mean, that's long enough. And everyone would agree that's long. But 105 minutes is when you decide, okay, now that's enough, and leave. Alright, I was going on a tangent. Now, this behavior is not just displayed by Felix. It actually is quite common in a lot of sea otters. There have been multiple documented cases showing extreme sexual aggression, infanticide, necrophilia, and pup ransom, where sea otters would capture harbor seal pups and blackmail their mothers for food. This is highly deviant behavior. Now, there have been no studies that I could come across which went into depth about this, but if we were to apply the triarchic model to this and considered boldness and meanness, then yeah, I would probably say that they're bold and mean and are just fearless in general. From what I could gather, scientists link this behavior to sexual frustration and failure to bond, along with poor impulse control, and they call it maladaptive sexual aggression. There's just no survival benefit for any of this behavior, there's no learning, and there's no correction. Even though we don't have enough studies to figure out what's going on, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, sea otters are fucking wild, and they are psychotic. So what have we learned? Can animals be psychopaths? Not in the human sense, but they can show low fear, low empathy, high impulsivity, and exploitative behavior. So yeah, animals can be psychopaths. Psychopathy isn't uniquely human, morality is. And sometimes evolution creates individuals who simply don't care.